All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's daf. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Stephen Terry Zinn, for dedicating all the Shuman Roshos this month with gratitude to Hashem as they welcome their fifth grandchild, Gavriel Amichai Zinn, and in memory of Dr. Zinn's mother, Devora Bas Rabbi Yisrael Yoel. Our week of learning sponsors, Beryl and Rachel Golkin in the Schusser of Fushlim for their nephew, Chaim Meir Ben Cyril Bluma. And our Daf Yomi sponsors, Ilan and Elise Roth for the Refuah Shlema of Bela Rivka Bas Esther Gittel. We also dedicate our learning Le'ili Nishmos, our fallen soldiers, Omer Smadga 25 from Ganot Hadar and Sergeant First Class Sajja Yaakov Deri 27 from Tel Aviv. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, their precious Neshamos Lav and Aliyah, those who were injured should have a refuah shalem, and all of our soldiers in Meir Hashem should be zocha to be matzliach b'chol ma'aseh adem, and Kadosh Baruch Hu should bring home our hostages b'shalom and b'karov. So with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Kuf Yud Dalid 114. We are picking up in Meir Hashem. Good. We are picking up on Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Beis 113b. We have a lot to do, and we left off, I believe, 4 lines into the wide lines. Tani Tana Kamed Rav Nachman, right? Tani Tana Kamed Rav Nachman. So the following was taught in front of Rav Nachman. Kederach Shem Mesajrin Be'erchen Kach Mesajrin Be'Balchov. The same way that we mentioned this yesterday. Quick outside review of this. There's a concept of erchen. Erchen means that Allah L'maisa, a person goes ahead and makes another erki alai. Hereby pledge my value to the Beis HaMikdash. The Torah Kedosha gives us objective values, objective categories of valuations. So now there's a concept of misadrin be'erchen, which means, let's say Ruvain pledges his erech. And let's just say for argument's sake, Ruvain's erech is $1,000. Ruvain can't afford to pay $1,000. So what does the Beis HaMikdash do? The Beis HaMikdash goes ahead and evaluates how much could he pay. That's what is called misadrin. Misadrin is we evaluate how much is Ruvain capable of paying while still maintaining just some semblance of normalcy in his lifestyle, right? Like we saw before, he needs a bed to sleep in. He needs some food to eat. He can't go and give up whatever utensils he uses for his parnasa. So the Gemara says, the same way that we evaluate for erchin, we also evaluate for a balchov. When a borrower has to pay back, or again, collateral is seized, so we go and figure out what type of collateral could be seized, right? What type of collateral could be seized without totally compromising the borrower. So, I don't understand. Does that make any sense? If the creditor is allowed to seize collateral and sell it, does it make sense that then we'd go out of our way to evaluate things for the borrower? In other words, the borrower is obligated to pay the debt. The creditor is allowed to seize collateral if the borrower has not paid. So if you're allowed to sell the collateral, does it make sense to think that we evaluate things for the borrower? One second. Who said you could sell collateral? But we just learned before that Allah, if you seize collateral, not only are you not allowed to sell it, but what? You have to give it back to the borrower at the time that he needs it. Gemara says, no. Tana, Reb Shimon Gamliel, Tani Kamei. We'll say, no, remember again, there was this position of Reb Shimon Gamliel in the Mishnah, which we have not discussed. Reb Shimon Gamliel in the Mishnah indicated that halacha l'maaseh, after 30 days, one is allowed to sell collateral. This is what it means to say. According to Reb Shimon Gamliel, you're actually allowed to sell collateral after a certain amount of time. Would it make sense to say that therefore we would evaluate things on behalf of the borrower? In other words, if you're allowed to take the significant step of actually going ahead and selling off collateral, it would seem to be clear that halacha l'maisa, one is permitted to go ahead one does not have to go ahead and evaluate things for the borrower. This nan, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, afli atzmo eno machzir ela ad shloshim yom. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says the lender is not obligated to give back to the borrower. Ultimately, again, the creditor, only up until 30 days. I'll say it differently. One is obligated to return collateral within 30 days of seizure. Mikan ve'ilach, after 30 days, mochrin bebezdin. One is permitted to go ahead and sell that collateral in bezdin. Umimai, dechika amar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel zabuni. Legamre Kamar. How do you know? So Rabbi says, so just to pause here for just a second. So here's what we're trying to figure out. Let's go with what we know. What we know is that halacha l'maisa, there's a concept by erchin, that if somebody is obligated for an erech vow, Beis Din evaluates what is he really capable of paying. So the shaila now the Gemara is running into is, do we apply that same concept to collateral seizure? Right? And do we say, look, right, I lent Ruvain $10,000. Ruvain hasn't paid, because remember again, the case of collateral that we're talking about over here is not collateral taken at the beginning of the loan. We're going to talk about that later on. We're talking about a different type of collateralized situation where due date for the loan comes, right? Ruvain isn't paying me back. I take property from Ruvain. So I seize collateral. So I'll say, so now we're getting into a whole discussion over here. Depending on the type of collateral, I may have to give him back his pajamas at night, right? Or his plow by day. So now, more than that also, in seizing collateral, we saw before in the end of yesterday's daf, that Allah I have to make sure that he has a bed and a cover and all this other kind of stuff. So now the shaila is, the Gemara says, so do we apply this same concept of what we call misadrin, or valuating things for collateral, like we apply for an erech vow? So before I as the lender seize collateral or perhaps retain collateral, does Beis Din do some type of valuation process for the borrower to see what he's really capable of giving up or not? That's our machlokes. Throw into the mix over here Rabbi Shmuel Silber. Rabbi Shmuel Silber has this idea, we have not explored this yet. Rabbi Shmuel Silber has this idea that you can seize collateral. Everyone says you can seize collateral. How you can seize it, when you can seize it is a discussion. But Rabbi Shmuel Silber says, after 30 days, I, the lender, have the ability to sell it off in satisfaction of my debt. So now the Gemara says it's all. So this is the whole mix that we're trying to figure out over here. So the Gemara says, "Umimai dechi ka'amar b'shem zabuni legamrei ka'amar." How do you know Rabbi Shmuel Silber says after 30 days that you can sell collateral? How do you know that he means that you could sell it in totality, right? Fully sell it. Maybe this is what it means to say. When you seize collateral for the first 30 days after the seizure, if the borrower is able to repay the debt, the lender is obligated to give him back the collateral in total. Mikan ve'ilach mehadrele. Mikan ve'elach, I'm sorry. Achal shivam hadrele be'inei. Mikan ve'elach mahadrele lemay dechazile umizabninan. So umizabninan may delo chazile. I'll say, watch this. Maybe after 30 days, here's what happens. I'll say, imagine for a moment. I go ahead and I lent Ruvain money. I lent him $1,000. So now what happens? I seized his coat, his winter coat. Right now, it's not yet winter, right? I seized his winter coat. So now, within 30 days, I have to go ahead and hold it. After 30 days, I'm allowed to sell it. We assume that what does sell it mean? What does sell it mean? Sell it. Maybe sell it means like this. Maybe Ruvain has one of those fancy coats. What do they call like the big puff coats? Whatever. So he has a fancy coat. He has a fancy coat, right? So I could say like this, Ruvain, look, you have a fancy coat. That coat is worth $1,500. So here's what they're going to do. I'm going to sell that coat. I'm going to go ahead and buy you a very nice coat for $500, right? You could buy, anyone could buy a coat for $500. You could buy 3 coats, 5 coats for $500, right? But Lamaisa, again, I guess it depends where you shop and what you buy. But again, right? So Lamaisa, again, so I'm going to buy you a coat. I'm going to buy you a coat for a couple $100, and I'm going to keep the rest of the money. I'm going to keep the rest of the money in satisfaction of the debt. So maybe that's what Shmuel Silber means. To which the Gemara says, if you think Rabbi Shmuel Silber holds this way, so leka midi de lo chazile. That's difficult, I will say, because then you're making an interesting judgment call, which is what people need and what people don't need, right? What's quote unquote fit for them and what's not fit for them. And I will say, here we come to something else. The Amar Abaye, because I will say, the Amar Abaye, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva, Kulu Sirlu, Kol Yisrael b'nei Malachim Heim. I will say, all of these Rabbanim hold, Klal Yisrael is royalty. So what does royalty wear? Royalty wears whatever royalty wants to wear. So maybe even though Reuven is wearing a $1,500 coat, and you don't need a $1,500 coat, right? Functionally, he could do the same thing with a $500 coat. Maybe the $1,500 coat is chazile. Maybe it's appropriate for him, right? Why? Because Klal Yisrael is royalty. So we'll say, now the Gemara is going to demonstrate how each of these Rabbanim hold of this concept. Where does Rabbi Shmuel Silber say it? Lo es haluf, lo es achardel. on Shabbos, you can't go ahead and move luf. And I will say luf is a type of kitnis, a type of lentil that's not really fit for consumption. And mustard seed, right? This is unground mustard seed. Is also not fit for consumption. So because of that, they are considered to be muktzah. So you can't go to move these things on Shabbos. Rabbi Shmuel says, no, you could go ahead and move luf on Shabbos. Why can you move luf on Shabbos? Because halacha l'maisa, it is fit for ravens. So we'll say, so apparently it's very interesting. So ravens were apparently the pets of the rich, or the pets of the wealthy. So the idea over here, I just try to get away from my garbage can, right? But it's incredible, right? So Lamaisa, they were the pets of the wealthy. So because of that, again, what did you feed your pet raven? Luf. So I'll say, what do you see from here? Shmuel says that luf is not muktzah. Why? Because wealthy people use it to feed their animals. Okay, but I'm not wealthy. Right? In other words, but you see from here that what? That what standard do you apply to the Yid? Right? What standard do you apply to the Yid? Of someone who's wealthy. Why? Because every single Jew ultimately, again, is b'nei melachim. Incredible. Rabbi Shimon, disnan. So I'll say that's Rabbi Shimon. What's Rabbi Shimon? Disnan b'nei melachim sachin b'sachin shemen vered al gabi makoseim b'Shabbos. Shekein darkon losuch b'chol. So we learned in the Mishnah that royalty goes ahead and smears rose oil, right, on their wounds on Shabbos, because they are permitted to do this on Shabbos because they do this during the week. Also remember, again, on Shabbos, you're not allowed to engage in medicinal healing, so therefore, technically speaking, you couldn't go ahead and put on an ointment. However, again, if somebody smears something on their skin during the week, just for beautification purposes, they could do it on Shabbos. So therefore, royalty could go ahead and use this rose oil on Shabbos, because again, they use it during the week anyway, just to beautify their skin. Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol Yisrael b'nei malachin. So therefore, Rabbi Shimon says all of Klal Yisrael could use rose oil on Shabbos as well. Why? Because all of Klal Yisrael is royalty. Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Akiva desanya Hari Shahayu Noshin Bo Elav Zuz V'Lovush Itztalia Bas Mea Mana. So also listen to this. Next, Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Akiva saying, let's say I lent Reuven 1,000 zuz, and Reuven was wearing a cloak that was worth 100 mana. Mafshitin oso mimenu. So I'll say, what do we do? So this is the case we just said before. I lent Reuven $1,000. Reuven's wearing a $1,500 coat. So what do? We take the coat, sell it off, use the proceeds to pay off the debt, and get Reuven a regular coat. I have a Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva, Kol Yisrael Ra'uyin La'ose Itztala. Rabbi Akiva says every Yid deserves a $1,500 coat, right? Every Jew is royalty, and therefore has a right to go out and wear expensive clothing. So the Gemara is supposed to say, so therefore again, the point is, you see, all of these opinions hold. All of Klal Yisrael are b'nei malachim. We are all royalty. I will say, when you begin to understand this, so everything takes on a very different bend in general. If one looks at themselves as royalty, which again has been confirmed over and over, so it demands a certain level of conduct, right? It demands everything from how we dress, right? This is why I will say, we have this concept of how a person is supposed to dress for davening, right? That a person is supposed to dress as if they're coming before the melech. Okay, obviously, societally, that'll mean different things, right? But the idea is I'm royalty coming before royalty. And as such, that requires of me a certain level of koved rosh, just a certain level of seriousness about how I present, right? Again, royalty always has to be concerned for its public image. So again, my obligation is to worry about not just what I'm doing, but how my actions are perceived by those around me. Royalty means that I stand in a line of succession for greatness, which means I have to prepare myself ultimately, again, for that greatness, that when I am vested with those royal responsibilities and duties, I am ready to go ahead and assume them. And lastly, royalty has destiny. Royalty knows that they have been chosen for something different. Every Yid has a tremendous destiny, is chosen for something meaningful and magnificent, and has to stand ready to embrace it. Such an incredible Gemara. So much more to say about it, but let's go weiter. So the Gemara says as follows. Now, according to the Havamina, that we thought that maybe we'll go ahead and sell off the item, buy the borrower something that is fit, that is functional and usable, and let the lender keep the rest of the money. So, so I understand you can apply that concept. Let's say with a blanket and a cover, right? So I'm sorry, a pillow and the blanket. Okay, so you could get a fancy schmancy, pillow and blanket. Or you could get a functional pillow and blanket. So I understand that. They could sell off the more expensive one, use the proceeds to pay off the debt, but make sure that the borrower has what he needs. He has a pillow and a blanket. But when it comes to, let's say, for example, a plow, right? So we'll say, I don't know, like a plow is a plow. There's a nicer plow, a not nice plow. So what's the pshat? To which the Gemara says, no. Amar Rava Barabba Macharisha de Kaspa. So we'll say, again, when you're looking for opulence, right, and you're looking for luxury, you can make anything into a luxury item. So again, there's like a Louis Vuitton plow, right? So you get it, and it has whatever. So it's made of silver. It does the same thing functionally as whatever the regular plow is made out of. Okay, but or metal. But Lamaisa, again, it's true, but it's worth more money. Okay, fine. So both say. So again, I just want to point out we have not answered our core question. Our core question ultimately is, we know that we are misandrin for erechin, right? Someone makes an erech vow, we evaluate what they can pay, what they can't pay. Are we misandrin for collateral? Do we say, okay, so now I lend Ruvain $1,000, he hasn't paid, I'm entitled to take collateral. We've already seen that I just can't take collateral blindly. If he needs it, I have to give it back to him. Do we make some type of valuation to figure out what I could take and what I can't take? In other words, what he could afford to give up and what he can't afford to give up. That's our shayla. That's our shayla, and we have not yet answered that. So let's go back there. Says the Gemara, Maskefla Rav Chana, V'lema lei v'lav alai kram. So we'll say this is incredible. So Rav Chana comes along and says, I understand. Why are you having this conversation? I lent Reuven $1,000. Reuven owes me $1,000. That's it. I'm sorry. Why do I have to care about what you can afford or you can't afford? I lent you money. It's time to pay up. There is collateral. I want to just be careful, say, right? It's not like I'm selling Reuven into servitude over here. There is collateral. Our shaila over here is, but can he afford to give up the collateral? Excuse me, who cares? Like, why is that my problem? I'm the lender. I'm owed money. Let's just to be fair to the lender for a second, right? I'm not charging interest, right? I'm not barging into his home and seizing collateral. I'm waiting outside. Why is it my responsibility to worry about what he can do or what he can't do? It's such a beautiful Gemara. Abaye says, top of Kuf Yudalit, 114a. Ivra alei karami. And Rabbi says, actually, it is your problem. It is your problem. Mishum shenemar ulachat yetzdaka. Because we'll say the pasuk over here, when it speaks about the concept of giving back a collateral that is needed by day or by night, says, and if you do so, ulachat yetzdaka, this will be considered to be an act of charity for you. Rashi says over here, sheyehei lo tzedaka, shakasaf hitil alav lasos lo tzedaka. So we'll say the idea over here is the Torah commands me, says this is an act of tzedakah that you lender are obligated in. Right? So we'll say a really incredible Gemara. So on one hand, sometimes like we fall into this trap of saying, not my problem. Someone else's circumstances are not my problem. And sometimes that is true. But a lot of times what it means to be part of the cloud is that someone else's problems are absolutely my problems. Someone else's challenges are my challenges. Even though, again, maybe they shouldn't be. We'll say, but that's what the din of arvos, that's what the din of mutual responsibility says. Your challenges are my challenges are your challenges. And even though, again, maybe you as the lender have every right to say, just give me back my money and let me go on with my life. But someone else's financial struggles ultimately, again, become yours as well. It's incredible. Ibailu. We'll say, Kuf Yudam Lav 114a, second line down. Ibailu. Maushi Sadru Babachov. So we'll say, so now, something interesting over here. So in general, we were asking, are we misandrin by mashkon? Right? So again, same case. I go ahead and I lent Reuven $1,000. I lent Reuven $1,000. Now I'm going to seize collateral. So do we assess like what Reuven could afford to give up with collateral, not afford to give up with collateral? So that we left open. The next question. Maushi Sadru Balchov. So we'll say, so do we go ahead and make some type of valuation in general by debtors? by debtors, right? I lent Reuven $1,000. So now leaving aside collateral, do we make some type of assessment in terms of what Reuven is capable of paying back or not? So the Gemara says, Mi gamar micha me'erchin alo. So we'll say, so do we make a gzir shava of kiyamuch, right? Because in both cases it says kiyamuch achicho mata yada imach or imachu me'erkecha. It's the same lashon of impoverished. We find lashon of impoverished when somebody borrows money, and the same lashon of impoverished when somebody can't pay back their erech debt. So do we say again? Do we say gzir shav of micha, just like there is a valuation that is made by erchin, so too there is a valuation made by debts, or not? Or no, we don't learn that gzir shava. So Tashma, let's analyze this. The shalach Rabin bi'igarte, right? Ravin sent a letter, and he said as follows. He says, I asked this question to all of my teachers. Right? Do we have this gzir shava of micha, mach, from erchin to balchov, to a creditor, to a debt? The Gemara says, "V'lo amru davar," and no one answered me. Baram kach haisa sheila haomer hare alai mana lebedek habayis maushi sadru. So we'll say, okay. So now, just so you understand what's happening over here. The only one case that we have so far where everyone agrees that there is a valuation is where? Is in the case of erchin, right? So again, I make an erech vow. Let's say my erech is $1,000. It turns out I can't pay $1,000, right? So what does the Beis HaMikdash do? The Beis HaMikdash dispatches, I don't know, their auditor, their gizbar, whoever it is, right? They do a valuation. They say, okay, Silber could pay $700. So we'll say, so now all we're trying to figure out is, do we take that model and apply to other areas of halacha? So for example, do we apply that to collateral collection? Now we're asking, do we apply it to general debt collection? That's our shayla. Now we'll say another question. So let's say, so now another question. What happens if I donate money to the Beis HaMikdash? Right? I donate money. I hereby pledge $1,000 to the Beis HaMikdash. So we'll say, so do we do some type of, and now I claim, obviously in this case over here, I'm claiming I can't afford it. I can't. So we'll say, so just want to point out, there's two ways that you could look at this when you say that I can't afford it, right? So we'll say, I pledge $1,000, two options. What are the two options? Option number one, valuate it, right? Valuate it. Okay, how much can you pay? And then that's what you're going to be obligated to. Option number two is, no, you're obligated. So pay what you can now, and the rest remains as an outstanding debt to be paid whenever. So I'll say, so that's our shayla. So Hari alai mana lebed kabayis maushi sadru. Look at Rashi. Hari alai mana lebed kabayis. About 4 lines in the short lines of Rashi. Vasagas yad loksiv ele be'erchin. Aval sharek deshos ein nidonin behesig yad. Umashi yesh lagovane meno va'moser yigvu la'achar zman im ya'ashir. So I will say, so interesting enough, the Gemara points out. So the Gemara asks the question. Rashi already jumped to the answer, right? But the Gemara asks the question. So somebody pledges money to the Beis HaMikdash. He claims now that he can't pay the full amount. So do we do a valuation? Rabbi Yaakov Mishmei de Bar Padav, Rabbi Yirmiyah Mishmei de Ilfa, Amri Kal V'chomer mi Balchov. We make a Kal V'chomer from Balchov, from a creditor. What's the or really from the debtor? What's the Kal V'chomer? Uma Balchov shemachzirin ein misadrin. So I will say by Balchov, when a Balchov goes ahead and seizes collateral, ultimately, again, right, he has to go ahead and return it back. Now, again, that refers to if I go ahead and seize Ruvain's plow, I have to give it back by day. I seize Ruvain's pajamas, I have to give it back at night. So when it comes to a balchov, when it comes to a creditor, machzirin, he has to give back collateral, and yet ein misadrin. And I will say again, halacha l'maisa, we're not misader. In other words, Rashi says over ein misadrin lahashir lo klum mishebal limkar li achar shloshim. So Rashi understands ein misadrin means is according to Shmuel Silber, after 30 days, once I sell it. That's it. And there's no valuation that's happening over here. So therefore, again, that's by Balchov. Therefore, hektish she'in machzirin. By hektish, Rabosai, when the Beis HaMikdash seizes something, ultimately, again, there is no return of that object. And I was about to say, if collateral is seized by the Beis HaMikdash, this is actually very interesting. There's no concept of returning the collateral when it's needed. For example, the Beis HaMikdash seizes my pajamas, right? There's no, well, Silber needs his pajamas at night. There's like, no, the Beis HaMikdash has my pajamas and that's it. So there's no machzirin, ain't no din shein mesajin. So once I goes without saying that there shouldn't be evaluation as well. That's Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, neder be'erkicha. Ksiv. So we'll say ultimately again, Erchin uses by Erchin we have the lashon of neder as well to teach us. Ma Erchin misadrin, av hektish misadrin. The same way that by Erchin we make this valuation, so I will say by general hektish we make valuations as well. So therefore again, if I pledge $1,000 to the Beis HaMikdash and then I claim that I can't pay it, Beis Din will come down, or Beis HaMikdash will come down, evaluate what I can pay, and that's my obligation. The same model as we have by Erchin, and Rabbi say that is in fact how the Rambam paskins. That Erchin and Kodshim, right? So again, an Erech vow or general vow to the Beis HaMikdash are treated the same. So you pledge money, then I claim I can't pay the full amount of the pledge. Beis HaMikdash comes along and says, okay, let's evaluate what you can pay, and that's what you're obligated to pay. That's it. The idach, the other opinion will say, Hahu, I'll jump the gun a little bit on the conclusion, but okay, the idach, the other opinion will say, Hahu, lenidon bichvodo hu da'asa. The other opinion will say that gzeir shava between Erchin and general nidarim to the Beis HaMikdash comes to teaching another halacha of bichvodo. We'll see what that means in just a moment. Rashi says, Ma Erchin nido bichvodo, af hekdish nidon bichvodo. So we'll say this is very interesting. So now, the halacha is like this. If somebody, let's say by Erchin vows, right? If somebody says, I hereby pledge the value of my heart or my head, what we call Ever Shan Neshama Teluyabo, a part of the body that you can't live without, that is effectively making a full Erech vow. In other words, saying I pledge the Erech of my heart is the same thing of saying what? I pledge the Erech of my body, of me. Conversely, if a person says, I pledge the Erech vow of my pinky finger, right? So Lamaisa, such a vow like that is meaningless, right? Wow. Why? Because a person could live without their pinky finger, right? So the Gemara says over here, the Gzeir Shava comes to teach you that the same halacha ultimately again applies by hektish as well. A person goes there, now here's the difference by hektish. By hektish is, if you pledge the value of your heart, your head, then you've been makdish your entire value. By hektish, you can go ahead and pledge the value of your pinky finger. You can. How do you establish the value of a pinky finger? So again, we would look at someone sold as a servant with a pinky, person sold as a servant without a pinky, and that difference is the value of a pinky. Okay. So Gemara says, V'sadru b'bachov, but we still like this. You should make a valuation in the case of a creditor, or really in the case of the debtor, based on a kavachomer from Erchin. How's the kavachomer? Uma Erchin shein machzirin misadrin. By Erchin, I will say again, if the Beis HaMikdash seizes collateral is never returned, even if the borrower requires it or the vow requires it. And yet again, misadrin, we do a valuation. Balchov shemachzirin. By a balchov, where you do return collateral if the borrower requires it. Eino din shemasadrin. Certainly you should do a valuation. Amakra ve'imachu me'erkicha. So I'll say no, because the pasuk says by Erchin imachu. Only if he can't afford to pay him by Erchin who for lo balchov. Okay, ve'idach hi ad she'eh b'makosa mitchila savat sofo. So the other opinion uses this drasha to teach me that what the only time I will say that you get a valuation by Erchin is if you are poor from beginning to end. I'll give you an example. Let's say again, Reuven makes an Erech vow. Right, and Reuven, the Erech says, Erech Yalai pledges his value. His value is $1,000. Then he realizes, I can't afford this. So what happens? He calls up Beis HaMikdash comes down, they evaluate him. Okay, Reuven, you could pay $700. That's the evaluate. Then Baruch Hashem, Reuven wins the Powerball, right? And now he could afford it. He could say, but you know what? You already evaluated me. To which the Gemara says, no. The only time you get the reduced valuation is when you are poor from beginning to end of this process. But if you run into money somewhere in the middle of the process, you're obligated to pay your full vow. V'yachziru behegdish kal v'chomer mibalchov. So we'll say we should go ahead and give back collateral behegdish. Excuse me. Based on a kavachomer from Balchov, Uma Balchov she'en misadrin machzirin. By Balchov, we'll say where we don't do evaluation yet. The halacha is that you return collateral if the borrower requires the collateral. Hekdish shemisadrin enodin shemachzirin. By hekdish, ultimately again, By Ekdish, where we do in fact engage in a valuation. So it doesn't, because we're just Kavachomer to Erchin, doesn't make sense that ultimately we should return collateral to the borrower if he would need it. Amarkra, V'shachav b'salmaso, or beirachecha. So we'll say ultimately again the pasuk says that if I borrow Ruvain's pajamas, right, and now no, I lent money to Ruvain and now I took his pajamas as collateral. So the Torah says now I have an obligation to give him back his pajamas that night, so that he could go ahead and wear his pajamas that night. Ubeirachecha, and ultimately again HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give you a bracha. So we'll say, what do you see from here? Yatsa hekdish shein tzarich bracha. This is beautiful. So we'll say, so you see from here the obligation to return collateral only applies to someone who requires bracha. Who requires bracha? Me and you. Who doesn't require bracha? Hekdish. Hekdish, right? Hekdish doesn't require bracha. Hekdish is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Ribbon Shalom is bracha. He doesn't require bracha. And therefore, again, the obligation to return collateral doesn't apply, when needed by the borrower, doesn't apply to Hekdish. Says the Gemara Velo, is that true? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that there's no bracha? The pasuk says, Vaksiv, v'achalta v'savata uveirachta. So ultimately, again, we see bracha associated with the Ribono Shalom, to which the Gemara says, Ella amarkra ulachat yetzdaka. So I'll say this is very interesting. Rather, the pasuk says, when you go ahead and you return the collateral, it will be an act of tzedakah for you. I'll just point out, by the way, there actually is a machlokes how to read this phrase, ulachat tzedakah. What does it mean? Is it that you're committing an act of charity, or is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will go ahead and count this as an act of charity towards you? Okay, but right now the Gemara is clearly understanding it as a pashup shot, as, bless you, when you go ahead and you give back the needed collateral, ultimately you are performing an act of tzedakah. So the Gemara says, Mi shetzarech tzedakah, yatsa hekdish she'ein tzarech tzedakah. So I'll say this refers ultimately again to someone who is obligated in tzedakah or maybe needs tzedakah. But ultimately again, hekdish does not need tzedakah, and the acts of hekdish are not considered to be tzedakah. So I'll say this is actually a fascinating idea. That, what do you mean hekdish doesn't need tzedakah? It's almost like saying, like, pasuk says that the returning of collateral ultimately is within the parsha of tzedakah. So only someone who is shaykh to either giving or receiving tzedakah is obligated in this mitzvah. Hekdish is neither shaykh to giving nor receiving tzedakah. So as you think about this just a moment, hekdish is not shaykh to receiving tzedakah, right? I don't understand. Everything about how is the Beis Hamikdash making money, right? Isn't the din of the Beis Hamikdash ultimately again one of giving tzedakah? Isn't that what it is? So I'll say, what do you see from here? This is incredible yisod. So I'll say, we like to think that supporting the Beis Hamikdash is like a ma'aseh tzedakah. It's not a ma'aseh tzedakah. We're saying it's hakaras hatov. It's hakaras hatov. I look at everything that the Beis Hamikdash gives me, and at the end of the day, of course, when someone does something for you, you reciprocate. It's not a din in tzedakah. Tzedakah is I see someone else who's struggling. I may or may not have a shaykhus to that individual, so ultimately I'm going to give tzedakah. But Lamaisa, the Beis Hamikdash, which is the epicenter of national spirituality, of course I give to that, and it's interestingly enough, it doesn't, in halacha, it's not looked at as an act of tzedakah. It's looked at almost like as an act of just profound hakaras hatov, profound gratitude for everything that I get. Such a beautiful way to look at our relationship with the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so the Gemara says, Ashkechei Rabbi Bar Avuha le'Eliyahu. This is a great story, by the way, great story. So Rabbi Bar Avuha found Eliyahu. Where did he find him? He found him in a non-Jewish cemetery. Okay, Eliyahu Navi was walking between the tombstones, right? In a non-Jewish cemetery. So he asked Eliyahu, right? It's interesting, by the way. I say, also good to know, when you run into Eliyahu, skip the pleasantries, get right down to business, right? Hi, shalom aleichem, what brings you? None of that. Eliyahu Navi, Ma'ashi Sajal Bachov. Tachlis, I lent Ruben money. I lent Ruben $1,000. He owes me $1,000. So now he's claiming he can't pay me $1,000. So do we do some type of valuation or not? So let's remember again, two options in front of me. Do we say again there's a valuation that, okay, you can only pay $700, I'll pay $700. No, you owe me $1,000. Pay me what you can now, and the rest is an outstanding debt. So the Gemara says as follows. So fine. Amrlei Ma'aseh Yisrael. Amrlei Gamar Micha Me'erchin. Gabi Erchin Ksiv Ve'imachu Me'erkecha. Gabi Bachov Ksiv V'chiyam Chachicha. So Yomi says it's Parshet. Micha, Mach. This is Gzir Shavat Erchin. Just like by Erchin, if someone says Erki Alai, right, I pledge my value and I can't afford to pay that, Beis Din does a valuation and decides how much I can pay. That's what I'm obligated for and exempt from the rest. So too we apply the same concept to a borrower as well. If a borrower claims he cannot afford to pay the entire amount of the loan, then we evaluate what he can pay, and that's what he's obligated to do, technically exempted from the rest. So we'll say, Eliyahu Navi answers the question. We'll say, I just want to point out something incredible. So remember again, we're going to see why he's in what's going on in the cemetery, right? But Lamaisa, how fascinating it is. We normally have a concept that you are not allowed to learn Torah within a cemetery, right? Within Dalet Amos of a kever, you're not allowed to learn Torah. You're not allowed to perform mitzvos. Loig l'rash cherav oseh is considered to be disparaging to the dead because the dead are unable to go and perform mitzvos. So as I say, remember again, that only applies in a Jewish cemetery, doesn't apply in a non-Jewish cemetery. Incredible idea. Okay, well, let's go weiter. Amud Beis. Minayim arm shlo yitrom. Next question. So remember again, so because Rabbi Baravua found the Eliyahu Hanavi in the cemetery, and there's no one else around. I'm going to chaperine over here. Next question. How do you know that someone who's naked, right, someone who's unclothed, should not go ahead and take truma? Should not separate truma. Dichsiv, ervas davar. Because the pasuk says, literally again, a matter of nakedness should not be seen with you. Rabbi say, how does that answer the question? Take a look at Rashi. Ervas davar, b'shah she'ata medaber bo, lo yira b'cha ervas davar. Shmamina in adam mevarek hishu arum, v'torim boi bracha. So Rabbi says, this is incredible. Remember again, so the answer is that halacha l'maisa, when you separate out truma, you have to make a bracha. That's made bracha, right? So we'll say, so now in the Torah it says, "V'lo yira b'cha ervas davar," which we're dashing over here is that when there is davar, when there is dibor, when there is holy speech, you should not be unclothed. Therefore, because the separation of truma requires a bracha, and because you can't say a bracha when unclothed, therefore you can't separate out truma unclothed. Amar lei. So we'll say, okay, so now we took care of business. So Rabba now says, and Rabba Baravua now says to Eliyahu, Lav Kohenhu. So it says incredible. Eliyahu, you're a Kohen. Now, where do you get the Eliyahu Navi as a Kohen? So remember again, this goes with the idea that Eliyahu Navi is Pinchas. Rashi says over here, Lav Kohen Mar, Tika Laman Damar de Eliyahu Pinchas, Tichsiv Be, Kano Kinesi, V'chein Be Pinchas, Be Kanoes Kinasi. So I'll say, so interestingly enough, so if you go with the idea that Eliyahu Navi is Pinchas was a Kohen. Now, interestingly enough, remember again, Pinchas had conferred kahuna after he killed Zimri and Cosby. Hineni no selos brisi shalom. Hakadosh Baruch Hu gives him bris shalom, bris kahuna. So again, with the tradition that Eliyahu Hanavi is Pinchas. And mostly, by the way, not even a Gilgal. In other words, that Pinchas was blessed with longevity, right? And therefore, again, he's a Kohen. So the Rabbi Baruch says, what are you doing in a cemetery? Amarle, lo masni mar taras. So Navi gives a little musar. I see, you weren't doing Mishnah Yomi, right? So you're right, we didn't get to Taras yet, right? But Lamaisa, again, right, you should have been learning Meseches Taras. This time you would learn Meseches Taras. Rishon Bayachai Omer, Kivrei Sha'ovdei Gochavim Ein Metamin. I'll say it's incredible. The graves of idolaters, the graves of non-Jews, do not go ahead and convey tumah. Shene'emar, because the pasuk says, "Va'aten tsoni, tson marisi, adam atem." So I'll say actually a very beautiful pasuk in Yecheskel that literally again Hakadosh Baruch Hu says to us, "You are my sheep, the sheep of my flock, adam atem. You are man." So what do you see from here? Atem karuyin adam, ve'in ovdei kochavim karuyin adam. Hakadosh Baruch Hu says, you Klal Yisrael, you're called man, and the akum, the idolaters, are not called man. Now I will say, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. What does that have to do with being called Adam and Tumah? So Rashi says over something very interesting. He says, Ein mitamin de gabe oel ksiv Adam kiyamus ba'ohel. So we'll say, so for example, when the Torah seeks out the halachos of Tumas Ohel, it frames it as Adam kiyamus ba'ohel, if a man will die in the tent. So why Dafka use that lashon of Adam? So the Gemara is dashing based on this pasuk in Yecheskel that Klal Yisrael is called Adam and the Akum, the idolaters, are not called Adam. So therefore, Eliyahu Hanavi was saying that halacha l'maisa, there is no problem to be in the cemetery with an akum because it doesn't convey tumah. Now, I will say, so it's interesting, by the way, that Eliyahu Hanavi clearly felt that it's mutter and it's mutter like lechatchila. In other words, it's one thing to say if you were exposed to the tumah, you're not tamei. But what Eliyahu Hanavi seems to be saying is what? You're even allowed to go there practically. I will say, I'll just tell you where the shayla came up. The shayla came up for Kohanim, the science center. I don't know if they still have it, but the science center had like this whole mummy exhibition, right? Or skeletons, right? So there was a shayla for Kohanim, right? Yeah, you're a Kohen, you want to take your kids there, right? Or you want to go there yourself. Are Kohanim allowed to go? So I'll say, so Bepashtos Kohanim are allowed to go to these kind of things because halacha l'maisa, again, the chazaka is certainly again that it's not Jewish, right? We happen to paskin this way that kivrei afkum do not convey tumah. Now, whether or not again, a Kohen should be machmir with this, not to go ahead, not to go and expose himself to this type of tumah, is a different discussion. It's a different discussion. But technically speaking, you see, Eliyahu Hanavi was in the cemetery, a non-Jewish cemetery, because clearly again he felt there's absolutely no tumah, and by the way, absolutely no obligation to avoid that tumah either, right? Eliyahu Hanavi could have been anywhere. Although if you're Eliyahu Hanavi, you're probably thinking to yourself, I just need a couple of minutes of quiet, right? I just need to get away, right? And then then there's that guy, right? Seriously, man, right? Seriously, in the cemetery, I've been on this earth for centuries. I need 5 minutes. Okay, but I'm projecting. All right, anyway, the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says as follows: Amarle ba'arba lo matzina b'shisa matzina. So ultimately, I will say. So I'm sorry if I didn't finish off over here. So remember again, Eliyahu Hanavi gives Rabbi Baravua a little bit of musar, and he says, "You ask me why I'm in the cemetery. Obviously, you have not studied Maseches Taras, because if you studied Maseches Taras, then Lamaisa, you would know that the graves of an akum do not go ahead and convey any tumah. Okay, so to which Rabbi Baravua responds, "You're right, Rabbi. You're right. Barabolo Matzina. The truth is, I don't know Taras. I don't really even have mastery over the over the 4 primary starim." Remember again, if you look at Rashi, he says over Arbalo Matzina, Begirsa Darbas Darin Kigon Moed, Yeshuos. So we'll say Yeshuos is what Rashi calls Nezikin. Right? So Moed, Nezikim, Noshim, Sheinagos Bizmanazeh, Kibeimas. And I will say, so he says over here, Kachim, so again, Moed I understand, right? Moed, all of the Masechtas, Rosh Hashanah, Yuma, Sukkah, Megillah, all of those Masechtas which apply today. Yeshua's Nezikin, laws of damages, right? Noshim, all the laws of marriage, divorce, good. And I will say it's actually kachim. So the Gemara understands over here that kachim is something that everybody knows. Why does everyone know kachim? We don't yet have a Beis HaMikdash, because I will say, since we know that when we learn the halachos of kachim, much in the same way that when we say karbanos, when the shama parim svasenu, we get a kiyum as if we're offering up karbanos. That's why people study kachim. The other two ultimately again, the other two starim ultimately of zuraim and Taras we're not as well versed in, because halacha l'maaseh we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. Okay, so Amarle Amarle Dechekele Milsa. I'm sorry, Amarle Va'amai. Sorry, so Eliyahu Hanavi was incredible. So Rabbi Baravua's answer is, "You're right, Rabbi. I'm sorry. I don't know Taras. By the way, I also don't know Zuraim, and I barely know Nashim, Nezikin, Moed, and Kodshim." See, that is incredible. So Eliyahu Hanavi says, "No, my child. Why not? Why don't you know Torah? Why don't you have a solid grasp?" Amarle Va'amai, Amarle Dechekele Milsa. Rabbi Baruch says, the truth is, I spend a lot of time at work. Right? I spend a lot of time in the office. Right? I'm having struggles with my parnasa. I'm poor, and as such, again, the old parnasa, the yoke of earning a livelihood, has really stifled my spiritual growth. So listen to this. What is incredible. Dabre va'ayli legan Eden. Get ready for this. Eliyahu Hanavi takes Rabbi Baravua to Gan Eden. He says, "Okay, come with me. Having problems with parnasa? Come with me." Amarle, so he takes him to Gan Eden. Amarle pashat glimech safi shakal mehani tarfe. So they go up to Gan Eden and they come to a tree. The tree has a whole bunch of scattered leaves. Eliyahu Hanavi tells Rabbi Baravua, take off your cloak and gather up as many leaves as you can in your cloak. Right? So we'll say leaves of Gan Eden. Who could imagine the value of leaves of Gan Eden? So essentially, he was saying, Rabbi Ravua, gather up as much as you want. You'll come back to Olam Haza. You'll sell off the leaves on eBay, right? You'll go ahead, right? Who knows what's going to happen over here? Leaves of Gan Eden. It's going to be incredible, and you'll be set for life. Okay? So Safa, Shakal. So Rabbi Ravua, he tells you to do something, you do it. Took off his cloak, begins to gather up the leaves. Ki havenafik, as he was leaving Gan Eden, Shama de Ka'amar, he heard the following baskal. The baskal said, Man ka'achal alma ki Rabbi Baravua. Nebach. Who is consuming his olam haba like Rabbi Baravua? What the Baskal was saying to Rabbi Baravua was, you could take whatever you want, but just know, whatever you take now comes out of the future account. You're taking from your olam haba. So whatever you take now, go ahead and take. So nafatz shadinhu. So we'll say, so Rabbi Baravua hears this, what does he do? He empties out the cloak. He says, I'm not taking anything. They'll say such an incredible Gemara. Rabbi Baravua understood you could take now, you could get now. They'll say this is why you see, by the way, that sometimes when tzaddikim receive incredible bracha in Olam Haza, they have a concern, right? What's their concern? Their concern ultimately is it coming out of the account of Olam Haba? And I both say, one shouldn't get nervous. There definitely is a model where a person, Baruch Hashem, could enjoy bracha in this world and the next. But very often there is this tension between what you get in this world and what you have ultimately again in the next world. Which is why I both say, especially if a person does have material bracha in this world, it ups the responsibility to lead a life of dramatic spiritual accomplishment. Because at least that way, if I could say, Ribono Shalom, you gave me incredible material bracha, but I just want you to understand, your material bracha, we spoke about this last night in Chassidus, your material bracha has enabled me to live an even greater amplified spiritual life. Then it turns out that my material blessing in this world has not come at the expense of my spirituality. In fact, just the opposite. My material blessing in this world has enabled my spiritual growth, which then means that ultimately, again, my spiritual blessing in this world should be a schus for even greater, my material blessing in this world should be a schus for even greater spiritual blessing in the world to come. On the other hand, if my material blessing distracts me from spiritual growth, then chas v'shalom, material blessing could come at the expense of spiritual blessing in the world to come. Material blessing facilitates spiritual growth, then ultimately amplifies your reward in the world to come. So we'll say, the Gemara says, Vafilu achi, so now Rabbi Baravua decides not to take the Gan Eden leaves. Vafilu achi, isi leglimei. Now we'll say, even though he emptied it out, his cloak had the scent of Gan Eden. Let's say the reach of Gan Eden, the scent of Gan Eden. What's the scent? Rashi, what's the scent of Gan Eden? Like apples. Right? Gan Eden smells like an apple orchard. So the Gemara says, Sachat glimei reche. So the Gemara says, Zabne betreisra alfei dinare, palgino lechasunuse. So we'll say, Rabbi Baravua sold the cloak, and obviously again, you sell a cloak with the scent of Gan Eden, right? It's worth a lot of money. He made a lot of money, but he himself did not want to benefit from the money. So instead what he did is he gave the money, he split the money amongst his sons-in-law. Right? He gave money to his kids. So he did not want to personally benefit from it, so he sold it for a lot of money and he gave it to his kids. Incredible. We'll say beautiful Gemara. Tanrabanan, ve'im ish anihu lo sishka va'avoto. So we'll say the pasuk says that if the borrower is poor, do not go ahead and sleep with the collateral. In other words, again, it's talking about if you collateralize something in his pajamas, don't hold on to his pajamas, rather give it back to him. I ha ashir shachiv. So we'll say you could infer from this that if he's rich, what if he's wealthy, that you can keep his collateral. So the Gemara says, my kamar. So Amar Rav Sheshes Hagi kamar. Ish anihu lo sishka va'avoto atzlacha. Yeah, if he's poor, and you have his pajamas, don't keep his pajamas with you. Ha'ashir shachiv va'avoto atzlacha. But I will say, but if he is rich, in other words, einach inami, if he doesn't need, he has multiple sets of pajamas, right, or whatever, he doesn't need it back. So the Maisa, again, in that case, einach inami, you would be right that there would not be an obligation to go ahead and return it back. Incredible. Tan Rabbanon. Hamal v'eschar. Now we're going to talk more about that in tomorrow's daf about darshin and taimid dikra. In general, when the Torah gives you a reason for something, do we analyze and really hinge ourselves on the reason? So we'll talk about that. Tan Rabbanon. Hamal v'eschavero eno rosh mashkeno. We'll say if a person lends his friend money, you are not, you can't just seize collateral. And you're not obligated to return it, right? And you are in violation of all of these prohibitions. So that statement made absolutely no sense, right? Because the statement read, if you go ahead and you lend someone money, you're not allowed to take collateral. If you took collateral, you don't have to return it, and you're over on everything. What does this mean? Where's my kamra? What exactly are we trying to say over here? I'm going to have what it means to say. If you lend someone money, ideally, you should not go ahead and take collateral. Vim mashkino chayiv lahachzir. Now we'll say if you went ahead and, excuse me, if you went ahead and vim mashkino. Now we'll say now remember, we know this from the Mishnah. What does it mean from the Mishnah? You can't go and just seize collateral. That's what it means. You can't go into the guy's house to seize collateral, and you can't even stop him in the marketplace and just seize collateral. That's not the way collateral works, right? In other words, if somebody owes you money and now you want, and he's not paying you, you want collateral to pay for the debt, there is a mechanism that you as a private creditor have to employ. You can't just go and take the money. V'mashkino chayv lahachzir, and ultimately, again, if you went ahead and seized it, you have to give it back. V'over b'chol hashemos, and ultimately, again, you are in violation of all these prohibitions, aseifa, that is going on last case. So, we'll have to stop over for today. We'll pick up in Metzia Hashem tomorrow with the Maika Amar. With the Maika Amar at the end of the day. We'll say, tremendous. What a way, Baruch Hashem, to close out the week. Tremendous. It's supposed to be able to learn with all of you. So I just want to point out, our major question that we started with is still unanswered, right? In other words, that idea of misadrin. So it sounds like what we have over here, misadrin, we evaluate for erchin, we evaluate for kadshim, and the shaila over here is, do we evaluate ultimately again for balchov? So that depends on whether or not we subscribe to the gzir shava of micha, to be continued tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone. Let's learn with you this week. Chevron Eretz Yisrael. Thank you for allowing me to learn Torah in Eretz Yisrael with you. Great suchos.